Hey friends, tonight we're headed back to ancient Rome and into an unlikely new career involving bruises, wooden swords and sandals that don't fit. You've just woken up inside a gladiator training school, sore, confused and clutching something that definitely isn't a croissant. And unfortunately, you're not dreaming. You've been recruited to one of the worst jobs in Roman history. Where the food is suspicious, your bunkmate might be part ferret, and the best outcome is not dying too fast. Before we dive in, take a moment to like the video and subscribe if these sleepy time travel stories help you drift off. And let us know in the comments where you're tuning in from and what time it is for you. We love seeing our global crew of dreamers nod off together. Now dim the lights, grab a pillow and let the fire crackle, because it's time to find out why you'd never survive gladiator training in ancient Rome. Congratulations, you've just woken up in Rome, 68 CE, in a Roman gladiator training school, also known as a Ludus, also known as the worst decision you ever made. Your head hurts, not metaphorically, literally, because yesterday a man in a metal hat hit you with a stick and called it orientation. Now you live here. You're not sure how this happened. You were supposed to copy scrolls for the city archives. It was boring, yes. But it didn't usually end with someone losing a toe. You tried to explain that to the recruiter. He shrugged, handed you a wooden sword, and said, "Better than being eaten by dogs," then walked away laughing. So now, here you are, standing in the sandy courtyard of the Ludus, holding what might be a sword but also might be a slightly sharpened broom handle. You're surrounded by 20 other confused men and 2 women, all of whom are sweating and trying not to make eye contact with the guy eating a raw onion in the corner. The onion guy has 1 sandal, 3 visible teeth, and the confidence of a man who's fought at least 1 goose bare-handed. You instinctively step a little further away from him, just enough that your elbow brushes a barrel full of dull practice spears. You hope they're dull. You'd hate to start your gladiator career by impaling yourself while trying to be polite. Your new trainer, a man named Rufus who looks like someone chiseled him from leftover bricks, walks past each of you. He smells like iron and disappointment. He stops in front of you. "You fight?" he asks. You open your mouth to respond, but your brain says something like glub, and your tongue betrays you by sticking to the roof of your mouth. He grunts, then moves on. You've made an impression. You overhear someone whisper, "Fresh meat." You're not sure if they are referring to you or the unidentifiable grey slab being hauled into the kitchen. You decide not to ask. You're issued gear, tunic, sandals, and a belt that seems decorative at best. The tunic smells like it was worn by someone who died in it, possibly twice. The sandals are exactly 1 size too small, which Rufus insists builds character. You try to ask for a quill and parchment. They laugh. You're beginning to think this isn't a temporary internship. Then comes breakfast. Beans. Just beans. Served from a pot so large it probably has voting rights. You sit beside a man whose only word so far has been eel. He repeats it mid-bite, points at his tattoo of an eel and grins. You're not sure if it's his name, his profession, or a warning. But you nod politely and avoid his bowl. The man across from you is missing 3 fingers and still eats faster than you. When you ask what happened to his hand, he says, "Practice, dummy." You don't ask for clarification. The first day of training begins with light drills, which in Rome means sprinting up and down a gravel yard carrying a shield roughly the size of a small cow. By noon, you've sweated out half your body weight and are convinced your kneecaps are trying to mutiny. By mid-afternoon, you're asked to spar with someone named Brachus, who is either a former blacksmith or a current rhino. You last 11 seconds, and 5 of those were spent falling. When you wake up, again, you're staring at the sky through what might be your own sweat and maybe some blood. A concerned pigeon lands nearby, watches you for a moment, and then struts off like it's embarrassed for you. You relate to it on a spiritual level. By evening you've learned 3 things. Sand gets everywhere. Gladiators don't bathe alone. No one knows what's in the meat surprise stew, and asking earns you extra laps. The stew, incidentally, tastes like despair and unwashed turnips. You chew slowly and try not to think about what you saw Rufus throw into the pot earlier. Was it a hoof, a sock, a frog? All 3? Your cell is 8 steps wide, 4 steps long, and smells like ambition and wet rope. You share it with the eel man, who it turns out snores in Latin. He also hums lullabies in Greek. Badly. But it's strangely comforting. You consider running away, but the gate is locked, the walls are high, and frankly, you're too tired to climb anything that doesn't involve pillows. Besides, rumour has it that the last guy who tried to escape was turned into a cautionary tale and painted on the mess hall wall. It's not a good painting. That night you dream of scrolls, of quills, of libraries where no one yells "kill" before breakfast. You wake up with a nosebleed and a vague sense that your life is now a series of increasingly violent misunderstandings. Still, something stirs, a flicker of curiosity. Maybe it's the adrenaline, maybe it's the beans, but part of you wonders, what if you're not the worst? What if, somehow, this ridiculous, dusty, sweaty place is where you become someone new, someone strong, someone brave, someone who doesn't trip on their own sandal mid-battle, because despite the bruises, despite the stew, despite the fact that you are currently sleeping next to a man named after a fish, something inside you hasn't given up. Maybe you're a little tougher than you thought. Maybe you don't want to die on page 3 of someone else's scroll. It's a stretch. But you've eaten eel off a cart before. You've survived worse. Tomorrow they teach you how to block. You plan to survive that too, even if the shield weighs more than your dignity. Especially if the onion guy tries to pair up again. You're still not over that accidental elbow. Toilet wine and Testudo formations. Week 2 of Gladiator training. You're not sure what's worse, the smell of the training yard at sunrise, or the realization that this is your new normal. You've stopped asking when they'll let you leave. Everyone just laughs now. Even the guy who sleeps on rocks for fun. His name's Milo. He claims rocks make your dreams heavier. You don't ask what that means. You're afraid it's philosophical. By the end of your first week, you've acquired blisters in places you didn't know had skin. Your arms ache. Your back mutinies. Your thighs feel like they've been drafted into an unholy war. Rufus, your trainer, says this is good progress. You quietly suspect Rufus is not human, but a leather bag stuffed with muscle and sarcasm. One morning a man offers you a cup of something brown and suspiciously bubbly. Toilet wine, he says, beaming. You pause. Why is it called that? He shrugs. Because that's where we hide it. You don't drink it, but you pretend to. No one trusts a man who doesn't sip secrets. The Ludus is beginning to form its own strange social order. The onion guy, now universally known as Eel, has inexplicably become a kind of folk hero. Last night he beat 3 men in a row with a mop handle and then recited bad poetry about fish. Someone stitched him a cape out of old tunics. He wears it proudly, even during stew. You've also made a few friends, or as close to friends as you can have in a place where people bleed together professionally. There's Cassia, fast, silent, and terrifying with a trident. There's Gaius, enormous, gentle, and deeply committed to talking about bean cultivation. And there's you, still figuring out how to hold your sword without hitting your own leg. Each morning begins with the same chant: discipline, endurance, honour. Then Rufus hits someone with a stick, usually you. Discipline, he mutters as you fall into the sand. This week, They teach you the Testudo formation, a tactic where everyone huddles under shields like a grumpy metal turtle. In theory, it's beautiful. In practice, it's 10 people shouting about elbow placement and one guy farting under the dome. Your group fails the drill spectacularly. Rufus sighs and tells you to reconsider your life choices. You already have, repeatedly. After drills, there's reflection time, which sounds gentle, but is really code for scrubbing blood off shields and debating the ethics of using a severed finger as a bookmark. You overhear someone say they used to be a sculptor. Another says they were a senator's body double. One swears she was a priestess until she stole a sacred goat. You begin to realize the Ludus is not just a school, it's a last stop, a strange, accidental family formed of mistakes, bad luck, and one very confused goat thief. The food hasn't improved. If anything, the beans have become bolder, spicier, more self-aware. Today's stew includes a chunk that might be leather. You don't ask, you just chew. Eel teaches you how to sneak second helpings by distracting the kitchen slave with dramatic sneezing. It works 3 times, until he actually sneezes blood. Now you're under mild stew probation. Evenings are your favourite time. The training stops, the bruises settle, the fire pit is lit. Everyone pretends, just for an hour, that you're not all here to eventually die in public for other people's amusement. Someone plays a flute badly. Someone else sings a song about figs and shame. Eel tries to arm wrestle a dog. The dog wins. You share stories, fake and real. You tell them you once copied a scroll so long it took 3 lunches and a nap. They nod solemnly. Cassia says she once fought off a tax collector using only sarcasm. Gaius claims he met a ghost in the latrines. You decide not to ask follow-up questions. One night Rufus joins the circle. He doesn't say much, just sharpens his blade and drinks something that smells like fire and bark. Then he looks up, just once, and says, "Tomorrow's the first culling. Don't be stupid." Silence. You ask Gaius what he means. Gaius stares into the fire and mutters, "You'll see." You don't sleep much that night. But in the early hours, just before the horn, Eel leans over and offers you half a stale fig. You accept it, no words, just a nod between 2 people who've stopped expecting good news and started valuing strange small gifts. The next day, the culling begins. Your first real fight, the culling begins. You've survived the stew, the drills, and Eel's bedtime stories about angry sea gods. But nothing prepares you for culling day. Rufus doesn't explain it. He just walks into the yard with the torch, points at 20 names on a board and says, "Pair off." There's a hush. Even the wind goes quiet, like it doesn't want to be blamed for what's about to happen. You glance around. Cassia sharpens her blade without blinking. Gaius mutters something that sounds like a prayer, or possibly a bean recipe. Eel has tied his cape into a headband and is shadowboxing an invisible squid. You're paired with a man named Varro, tall, scarred, and apparently made of oak. You try to shake his hand. He looks at it like it's something he'll have to amputate later. The rules are simple, don't die. Rufus throws down a staff. When it hits the ground, you begin. You take a breath. It smells like fear and breakfast beans. The staff drops. Varro moves first, fast, too fast. You manage to duck barely and swing your wooden sword in a wide, awkward arc that probably insults his grandmother. He blocks it with one arm, grabs your tunic and flings you onto the sand like a sack of regret. Cheers erupt from the sidelines, not for you. You spit sand, then blood, then maybe a tooth. Unclear. Varro charges again, but this time you roll. Not gracefully, more like a sack of wet laundry being kicked downhill, but it works. His strike misses, and for a glorious half-second, you're upright again. You jab forward. It hits his shoulder. He growls. You almost apologize. He slams you with the flat of his blade. You fly backward, not in the heroic slow-motion way, more like a pigeon being startled off a statue. Rufus yells, "Up!" You groan. Your bones consider early retirement. Up. You stagger to your feet, Varro's breathing hard. He nods, once, as if to say, "Okay, worm, you've earned a second swing." You take it and miss completely, but you don't fall this time. That feels like progress. Eventually, Rufus calls the match. Enough! Nobody's dead. Boring. You collapse beside the water barrel, soaked in sweat, shame, and a little triumph. Varro walks over, offers you a piece of bread. It's stale, like vengeance left in the sun, but you take it. You fight like a librarian, he says. "I was a scribe, you wheeze." He grunts. Figures. From that day on, he calls you Scroll. You hate it, but also, you kind of love it. That night, there's a small celebration for those who survived. The ones who didn't, quietly packed off. No ceremony, just empty cots and bowls still half full of stew. No one talks about them. The survivors drink, not toilet wine, but something slightly less fermented. Someone even finds a date cake. It's hard as marble, but sweet. Cassia slaps your back so hard you forget your own name for a moment. Gaius tells everyone you fought like a panicked crane. Eel writes a song about it. The lyrics are terrible. You ask him to sing it again. Later, Rufus gathers you around the fire. "You lived," he says. "That's not nothing." Then he tosses a scroll into the flames. "Tomorrow," he adds, "you learn how to kill." The fire pops. Sparks rise like tiny souls. You don't sleep well, but when the sun rises, you're still there. And somehow, you're ready. The anatomy of a bruise. You wake up stuck to the floor. Not because someone knocked you out again, but because your back is glued to your own dried sweat. The gravel digs into your shoulder blades like judgment. Your arms don't work. Your legs refuse to negotiate. Your ribs sing a soft aria of pain in 3 distinct keys. Every breath is a negotiation. Every movement, a lesson in humility. You manage to roll over and discover, yes, your nose is bleeding. Again. You're not even surprised anymore. It's just part of your morning now, like beans and dread. The medic finds you by following the groans. He's the same guy who stirs the stew at night, which raises questions. His tunic is stained with things that might be herbs, or might be regrets. "Bone wine or beet paste?" he asks cheerfully. You stare. "One tastes bad and works," he says. "The other tastes worse and does nothing. Guess which is which." You say nothing. He shrugs and gives you both. The bone wine tastes like someone soaked sandals in vinegar. The beet paste is applied directly to your shoulder with what looks like a poultry brush. "There," he says proudly. "Now you're disgusting and slightly less dead." You try to thank him, but your tongue sticks to your teeth. So you give him a respectful grunt and shuffle away like a polite mummy. Back in the yard, Rufus barks commands like a man who's never once felt empathy. "Line up," he shouts. "If you're bleeding, bleed in formation." Your body rebels. Knees wobble, ankles whisper threats. But you get in line anyway, because pain is temporary and Rufus is forever. Today's lesson is footwork. Which seems unfair, considering you're reasonably sure one of your feet has detached emotionally from your body. Still, you shuffle in circles, dodge invisible spears, and pray no one calls on you to demonstrate. The guy next to you mutters something about ghosts. You're not sure if he means his past or the guy who passed out mid-lunge yesterday. Then there's Brachus, towering, bruised, slightly purple in the left eye from your last match. He nods at you. Not friendly, not hostile, just acknowledgement, which, in the Ludus, is the closest thing to respect. Later you try to write down your thoughts in the corner of the yard using a piece of tile and some leftover soup. It's not elegant, but it helps. You scroll Rufus equals tyrant, Brachus equals rhino, me are alive, barely. You're proud of that. Until a gust of wind erases your entire journal with one sloppy splatter of stew. You sigh. You've started over before. You'll start over again. At lunch, the stew is served with bread that could legally be classified as masonry. You dip it anyway. You're desperate. A younger recruit asks, "Will we always feel this sore?" You open your mouth to say something wise and something comforting, but all that comes out is a sound like a goat sneezing. He nods solemnly, as if that's the answer he feared. After lunch, you're assigned to light training. This means dragging a sled full of sandbags around the perimeter of the yard. Why? Because Rufus believes in building core strength through pointless suffering. Your blisters develop personalities. One of them is French. Then comes the spear drill. You're told to throw it at a wooden post with conviction. You throw it with all the grace of a deflating wineskin. The spear hits the ground, bounces, rolls lazily away like it's embarrassed to be yours. Rufus sighs. He doesn't yell. Somehow, that's worse. The day ends with a full-body rinse using a bucket of water that smells like regret and moss. You scream inwardly. Outwardly, you just shiver and try not to weep in front of the eel guy. You check your bruises. They've begun to form interesting constellations. You name one Failure Minor, another Aucius Maximus. That night you try to sleep, but every position hurts. Lying on your back feels like betrayal. On your side, treason. On your stomach, actual war crime. Your roommate snores in Latin again. You count the syllables. You briefly consider smothering him with a tunic, but realise the tunic smells worse than he does. You lie awake and try to breathe. Then, from the hallway, you hear someone crying, not loudly, not theatrically. Just the quiet sound of someone unravelling in the dark. You don't know who it is, but you know how they feel. You close your eyes and silently join them. Friends, frenemies, and other accidents. It starts with an olive. You didn't mean to steal it, not really. You were just hungry, sore, and standing a little too close to a crate when someone called break, and you instinctively grabbed the nearest thing that wasn't on fire. Now you're sitting beside Eel, your cellmate, roommate, and reluctant snore partner, both of you chewing slowly, like the olive might explode or confess state secrets. He glances at you, then at the olive pit you're holding, and then back at you. He nods. That's it. You've just made a friend, or a witness. Hard to tell. Later that day, you're sparring again. This time with a woman named Livia who has the reflexes of a startled cat and the upper body strength of a trebuchet. She sweeps your leg before you can finish asking, "Wait, are we using real blades to You hit the ground like a sack of regret. The sky stares down with judgment. She helps you up with one hand. The other holds your weapon, which used to be in your hand. In the corner, Brachus and the onion guy are arguing. You assume it's about tactics. Turns out it's about soup. Specifically, whether it's acceptable to add pigeon. This sparks a spirited philosophical debate that quickly devolves into a headlock. Rufus doesn't break it up. He just yells, 10 laps for the loser, and keeps drinking something suspiciously chunky from a tin cup. That night, after drills, you find a quiet spot near the latrines. A risky location, sure, but one of the few places with shade and relative solitude. You sit with your back against a sun-warmed stone, knees drawn up, breathing in the pungent aroma of honesty and fermented cabbage. It's oddly calming. Livia finds you there. She sits without a word. You don't talk for a long time. Eventually she says, "I miss silence." You nod, because you do too. Turns out she was a farmer once, had goats, a sister, a son. "Don't look surprised," she says, seeing your expression. "What, you thought we all sprang fully formed from sand and trauma?" You share your story, or at least the edited for pity version. The scrolls, the wrong signature, the recruiter with a drinking problem and a quota. She laughs once, a single dry exhale, and says, "Figures." That moment, between latrine breezes and old shame, is the first time you feel like maybe you're not alone here. Not completely. Maybe gladiators don't bond over glory. Maybe they bond over stupid luck and shared blisters. Back in the cell that night, Eel hums his Greek lullaby a little softer. You think you hear him add a verse. It's mostly vowel sounds and a questionable rhyme involving turnips, but it's nice. The next morning, someone has scrawled a crude drawing on the wall near the training yard. It's clearly supposed to be you. Crooked nose, wild eyes, and a tunic tucked wrong. Beside it, the words, "Sandal Slayer." You're offended, then oddly flattered. You confront the artist, a skinny kid with 2 large sandals and the attention span of a bird. He offers no defence, only a shrug and a handful of dates. You take one. It's not an apology, but again, it's nice. Later that day, during shield drills, you find yourself instinctively watching Livia's form. It's efficient, precise. You copy it. Poorly, but it helps. When you block a strike that would have definitely broken at least one rib, she notices. Nods once. You feel like you just passed an exam no one told you were taking. Even Rufus seems marginally less disappointed. Instead of calling you hopeless, he mutters something like mildly conscious, which for him is basically a sonnet. That evening, the stew is extra salty and possibly made of mushrooms, dreams and regret. You're halfway through chewing when Eel slides something across the table. A small flat pebble, smooth and warm. There's a crude carving of a fish on it. You blink. He says nothing, just gestures for you to keep it. Your first gift. From a man who once licked rainwater off a spear for fun. You put it in your belt pouch, right next to the olive pit from earlier. You're not sure why you kept that, but suddenly you're glad you did. Rufus ends the night with a speech. Well, more of a grunt with occasional nouns. He says the next few weeks will separate the soft from the steel, that only the worthy will be chosen for exhibition matches, that anyone caught stealing olives will be put on kitchen duty. You glance at Eel. He's already licking his fingers. You look away. As you lie on your back later, the stone cell floor your mattress, a rolled-up tunic your pillow. You think about bonds, not the kind made with iron chains, the kind forged by sweat, awkward conversations, and shared meals of questionable stew. Maybe, in this strange, brutal place, friendship is just survival with better lighting. Maybe these people, the ones who fight, sing, snore, and occasionally throw olives, are the closest thing you've got to a tribe. You fall asleep to the sound of Eel humming, and for once it doesn't bother you, not even a little. Public baths and private regrets. You knew the day would come, when someone handed you a towel and said, "Time to wash with strangers." It wasn't even a special occasion, no festival, no triumph, no congratulations you survived Brachus's left hook. Just Tuesday. They marched your whole training group across town. past shouting vendors and chickens with too much confidence, to a set of marble steps that shimmered like a mirage in the heat. The public baths. A place where Rome pretended hygiene and humiliation were the same thing. Inside dash. It smelled like steam, sweat, and cedar oil. A slave with no eyebrows handed you a bucket. Another handed you a scrap of soap that looked suspiciously like it had already been used. You whispered, "Is this normal?" And someone muttered back, "Only if you're lucky." You hadn't seen this much nudity since birth. And even then, you were the only one involved. Men lounged on stone benches, arguing about olives and stabbing techniques, while others doused themselves with freezing water and called it refreshing. One man combed his beard with what appeared to be a fishbone. Another was exfoliating with volcanic sand like he'd been waiting his whole life for this moment. And then you saw your trainer, Rufus, fully unclothed, wearing only a glare and confidence. He was scrubbing his armpit with a tile shard and issuing orders like it were a battlefield. "Clean your elbows, that's where the worms settle." You weren't sure if it was metaphorical, but you didn't want to risk it. The baths had sections. The frigidarium for those who hated joy, the tepidarium for those with commitment issues, and the caldarium where the water boiled your regrets right out of your pores. You were shuffled into the tepidarium. Lukewarm water, lukewarm enthusiasm, a tepid affair all around. You tried to relax. But a man next to you began explaining the military formations of turtles in great detail, while casually shaving his ankle. Then someone behind you sneezed. In Latin, it sounded accusatory, just as you considered drowning yourself in 2 feet of water. A slave approached with a strigil, a curved metal scraper designed to remove oil, sweat, and the will to live. "Turn," they said. You turned. "Other way." You turned again. They began scraping. You discovered new definitions of shame. To distract yourself. You eavesdropped. 2 older men discussed politics. "I told you Claudius would outlaw goat rentals. He's a visionary." Another pair debated whether bears or Britons made better opponents. "Bears have claws. Britons have clubs." "Yes, but bears don't whimper." Point. You spotted one of your cellmates, Cassia, the only woman in your cohort, on the other side of the bath. She was calmly braiding her hair while a noblewoman tried, and failed, to insult her. Cassia leaned in and whispered something, and the noble blushed so hard she nearly slipped off the bench. You made a mental note never to get on Cassia's bad side. Suddenly, you heard your name, whispered, giggled, repeated. You turned. 3 teenage boys were pointing at you from the other end of the pool, snickering into their towels. You checked your sandals. Forgot you weren't wearing any. One of them yelled, "Hey, you're the one who tripped during the parade." You pretended not to hear. "Are you going to die next week?" Still pretending. "I bet 10 denarii on your spleen." You waved politely, the international symbol for please go away. You slid under the water, thinking if you stayed still enough, maybe the shame would drown first. Eventually. Your group was called to the massage slab, not optional. A man the size of a temple began kneading your back like it owed him money. You gasped. He said, "Relax." You tried. Then he cracked your spine like a walnut. You spent the next hour wondering if bones were optional. Another man massaged your feet and asked if you'd ever considered the priesthood. You said you liked dogs too much. He said, "Fair." After the baths, you felt clean, physically, emotionally. You felt like a goose that had been plucked and then judged for squawking. On the way back to the Ludus, you passed a betting board. Your name was on it. Odds 12 to 1, alive by next moon. Next to your name, someone had drawn a frown. It might have been your roommate, or your trainer, or you in a moment of self-awareness. That night, you lay in your bunk smelling faintly of lavender and regret. Your skin felt new. Your dignity felt borrowed. But you were alive, still ridiculous, still here, maybe tomorrow. You'd win a fight, or at least remember to tie your belt. Parade of Meat, aka you. You were hoping for a quiet morning, maybe even a chance to fake a limp and avoid drills, but instead, Rufus announces it's time for a public exhibition. That's Gladiator code for put on your least sweaty tunic and prepare to be judged by people holding grapes. The entire Ludus is shuffled into formation like cuts of questionable meat in a butcher's window. You're handed armour that squeaks when you move, not because it's polished, but because something is still alive inside it. The chest plate smells like regret and boiled cabbage. The helmet is too big. When you tilt your head, it clunks forward and knocks you off balance like a metal hood of doom. Rufus says, "You'll grow into it." You doubt this. You'll march through the streets of Rome with a kind of ceremonial dignity that's undercut by the fact that one guy's sandal keeps falling off. The crowd watches with the kind of mild interest usually reserved for passing clouds. A child throws a fig at your leg. It sticks. You don't break formation, but you do make a mental note of the child's face, not out of vengeance, just curiosity about who raised such a precise fruit assassin. You try to appear fierce, which is hard when your helmet slips again and you nearly headbutt the man in front of you. He does not appreciate it. "Try not to die in rehearsal," he mutters. You nod solemnly and immediately trip over a pothole. The crowd laughs. Somewhere, a nobleman snorts so hard his wine spills. You decide to focus on your feet from now on. The parade reaches the forum where makeshift wooden stands have been set up for Rome's elite. You're ordered to demonstrate formations, shield walls, testudos, individual flourishes with your weapon. Your weapon, by the way, is still basically a sharpened broomstick, but you twirl it like a pro until it flies out of your hand and lands in a fountain. You recover it. You pretend it was intentional. You bow. No one claps. During the choreographed sparring, your assigned partner is Brachus. Again. Either someone hates you, or fate finds you entertaining. He grins like he's about to open a bakery, and you're the dough. You exchange a few blows, his mostly real, yours mostly theatrical. One swing knocks the helmet clean off your head. The crowd gasps. You freeze. Your hair is sticking out in weird directions and sweat drips down your nose like a leaky aqueduct. You try to recover with a confident pose, but it's hard to look dignified while blinking blood out of your eye. "Bravo," someone yells sarcastically. You bow again. This time you do it ironically. Afterward, you're herded back through the streets. The same child throws another fig. This time it hits your shoulder. You think it might be a compliment now, a sign of respect from a pint-sized critic. Back at the Ludus, everyone is silent, exhausted, embarrassed. A few people beam with pride. They didn't fall, trip, or cry. One guy did all three, but he owns it like a badge of honour. Rufus gives a speech about public image and glory. You're pretty sure the word meat is used more than once. Later, as you scrape fig goo off your shoulder, you reflect. You've survived worse. The arena looms in your future, but today was practice, a dress rehearsal in rusted tin. You didn't shine, but you didn't break either. And somehow, despite everything, despite the armour, the sweat, the snorting nobles, you feel a strange flicker of pride. You looked ridiculous, but you look like a gladiator. And tomorrow you'll do it again, just with tighter sandals. The beast pits. You hear the roar before you see anything. At first you think it's thunder, distant, rolling, ominous. But thunder doesn't snarl, and thunder doesn't smell like fur, blood, and yesterday's cabbage stew. Rufus calls it Beast Day, like it's some kind of birthday party. He says it with a grin that suggests either excitement or indigestion. Either way, it's unsettling. You're marched with the others to a gated corridor beneath the arena, a place where torchlight dances across wet stone, and the walls sweat like they've seen things they can't unsee. The cages line the walls, thick bars, rusted locks, the occasional scratch mark that looks suspiciously like writing. You pass one cage with a bear the size of a wagon inside it. It looks at you. You look back. The bear licks the bars. You nearly drop your stick. Someone mentions Numidia. Someone else mutters the word hybrid. You don't ask questions. You've learned that in Gladiator school, curiosity doesn't kill the cat. It kills the curious. A trainer named Marius starts explaining beast protocol. You try to pay attention, but your ears are too busy listening to the rhythmic sound of claws against stone. Marius says the animals are well fed. That's supposed to be comforting. It isn't. He adds, usually. That doesn't help either. You're assigned to clean one of the empty holding pens. The key word there is empty. You're told the hyena has been removed. You hope they're right. You enter the pen cautiously, armed with a broom and what's left of your self-respect. The floor is damp and smells like fear. There's a chunk of something unidentifiable in the corner. You poke it. It twitches. You leave it alone. You sweep quickly, like you're trying to outrun the scent itself. Every shadow is a threat. Every creak is claws. You finish in record time and back out slowly like the world's most nervous mime. Back in the training yard, you practice with wooden animals. Yes, wooden. There's a fake lion on wheels, a painted boar with detachable tusks. Someone has even crafted a papier-mâché crocodile that smells like vinegar and glue. The idea, according to Rufus, is to simulate fear without losing limbs. It works, mostly. The wooden lion is pushed too hard and rolls into your ankle. You collapse. Rufus says, realistic reaction. You pretend it was on purpose. Again. That night, no one sleeps well. The usual chorus of snores and muttered nightmares is replaced with tense silence. Even Eel is quiet, though he does whisper something about badgers in his dreams. You lie awake, staring at the ceiling, wondering what kind of animal you'll face, if it'll be something simple, like a wolf, or something exotic, like a tiger that's been trained to juggle knives. Rufus says they don't use tigers anymore. Too expensive. That somehow makes you sad. You find yourself wishing for a small, slow duck. Something you could reason with, maybe even befriend. In the morning, you're woken not by a horn or Rufus shouting, but by the sound of chains being dragged across stone. You sit up. The sun hasn't even risen, but the beasts have. One of the new recruits vomits. Another begins to pray to at least 3 different gods just in case. You understand the sentiment. You'd pray too, if you weren't still mentally arguing with the bear from yesterday. You're not sure who won that staring contest, but it felt close. You're not scheduled to fight yet, but your name is on the rotation board. You're told you might be next week's entertainment. You nod. You try not to faint. You spend the rest of the day clutching your practice spear and whispering comforting things to yourself like, boars are just angry pigs and bears get tired too. Neither helps, but it's better than thinking about claws. That night, you sleep with your stick beside you, not under the bed, on it, like a partner, like a friend. You name it Gaius. You dream of wooden lions and real fear, You wake up sweating, whispering Gaius, no. Eel doesn't even blink. He just hands you a bowl of stew and says, don't eat the hoof. You weren't going to. You think it blinked. A letter from home, you think. The scroll arrived during lunch. If you could call a bowl of beige mush and a suspiciously crunchy pickle a meal. Rufus barked your name, or something close to it, and chucked the scroll across the courtyard like it was a javelin. It hit you squarely in the bread roll, which honestly improved the flavour. You stared at it for a second. The seal was smeared, probably reused, and the handwriting looked like it had been scrawled by someone in a cart going over cobblestones. Still, it was a letter. From someone. Somewhere. And in a place like this, where the most emotional communication you usually got was a headbutt, that felt like something. You unrolled it carefully, like it might explode. It opened with, Dearest nephew, or possibly cousin, which was either a joke or a genealogical shrug. The letter rambled for a while. Something about goats, a vague warning about tax collectors, a story that might have been about your childhood but involved a cat and a thunderstorm and ended with someone losing a sandal. There was a line that read, We're proud, mostly, and another that said, If you get famous, maybe don't mention the family eel business. You weren't sure whether to laugh or cry, so you did both, quietly, into your pickle. Your roommate, who'd been snoring with his eyes open, a skill you no longer questioned, blinked and muttered, Letter. You handed it over. He squinted at it like it owed him money, then nodded solemnly and said, Family. Then he bit into your bread roll, which was fair. The scroll had already seasoned it. For the rest of the day, you carried the letter in your belt like a charm. You knew it didn't mean much, but it meant something. Enough that you found yourself training harder, listening more, blocking a little faster, not because you thought someone back home was cheering for you, but because someone remembered you existed, even vaguely, even if they thought your name was Tarsus instead of Tarsius. The little things mattered. In a place where tomorrow wasn't promised and today came with a side of injury, even a half-remembered goat anecdote could feel like hope. That night, as you lay on your cot listening to Eel hum an off-key lullaby about sea serpents, you pulled out the letter again. You read it by moonlight, or what passed for moonlight through the cracked wall slat, and for the first time in weeks you didn't fall asleep thinking about swords. You thought about sandals, about goats, about the sound of thunder and the smell of wet parchment, and for a few precious breaths, just before sleep took you, you felt like more than a body in armour. You felt like a person again. Your big moment and the big mistake. It was finally your turn. Not practice, not drills, not some grumpy ex-legionnaire whacking you with a padded stick while shouting things like pretend you care. This was real, an actual match, in the arena, with drums and banners and people who paid to watch you either shine or hemorrhage. You didn't sleep the night before, not because of fear exactly, though there was that, but because the eel man was trying to compose a battle chant in your honour. It rhymed glory with gory, and then veered into an unsolicited anecdote about a foot fungus that once saved his life. By the time the sun rose, you were too exhausted to be scared. Just resigned. To fate. To the sand. To whatever fresh indignity awaited you in the Flavian amphitheatre. You were marched out in single file, armour glinting in the sunlight, or at least trying to. Yours had more dents than shine, and one shoulder plate was held on with twine. A crowd roared as the gate opened, a human thunderclap echoing through stone and bone. You stepped forward and instantly forgot everything you'd been taught. How to grip the gladius. where to stand, when to breathe. Gone, flushed out of your head like stew down a latrine. And that's when you realised it. You'd forgotten your helmet. It wasn't even nearby. Wasn't strapped to your back or waiting at the entrance. It was still on the peg in your cell, sitting quietly next to your extra pair of socks and a half-finished letter to your aunt about elbow injuries. You reached up, just to check. Nope. Naked head. Vulnerable scalp. A soft and lightly sweaty beacon of error. You thought about running back. Just sprinting through the arch and yelling time out in Latin. But the crowd had already seen you. And worse, your opponent had seen you. A man built like a tree stump and twice as inflexible, with a forehead you could serve dinner on. He smirked, not kindly. The announcer didn't care. He boomed your names, exaggerated your accomplishments, and called it a duel for the ages. You weren't sure which age he meant. Hopefully not a long one. Then came the signal. A trumpet, sharp and shrill. You stepped forward on instinct, knees locking like bad furniture. Your sword felt too heavy. Your shield too light. Your brain an abandoned festival tent full of echoing screams. The first blow missed you, mostly because you tripped. You fell forward just as your opponent swung wide, the blade hissing where your ribs had just been. The crowd gasped, then laughed, then gasped again as you somehow rolled back to your feet, covered in sand and shame. You squared off, legs wobbly. Your opponent came in again, this time with a low feint. You remembered to block, just in time to catch the flat of his blade against your thigh. It stung like betrayal. You yelped. Possibly in a pitch only pigeons could hear. From the stands you heard chanting. A name. Was it yours? Number? It was his. Of course it was. He raised his arm, soaking up the adoration like an olive in oil. You took the moment to stab at his leg. It was mostly symbolic. The blade bounced off his greaves and left your wrist buzzing. The fight blurred after that. A swirl of dust and footwork and clanging sounds that might have been metal or might have been your teeth. You gotten a few decent hits. One even made your opponent grunt. But mostly you survived by sheer accident. A stumble here. A duck there. At one point you sneezed and managed to dodge a full swing. By the time the match ended, you were bleeding from somewhere. Nothing major. And your opponent had a limp he didn't start with. The referee, a man with a face like old cheese, raised both hands to the crowd. They cheered. Not for victory, but for effort, for chaos, for spectacle. And somehow, you were part of it. You stumbled off the sand, legs shaking, heart doing its own gladiator routine inside your chest. The eelman hugged you. Rufus nodded once, as if to say, not terrible. You collapsed on a bench and finally laughed. Helmetless, bruised, humiliated, but not dead, and that apparently counted as success. The gods of sand and sweat, you should have been resting, bandaged, quiet, maybe lying on a cold stone floor contemplating the various ways in which your body now resembled a bruised fruit salad. But instead, you were kneeling before an altar, trying not to sneeze on Mars, not the planet, the god, or at least a lumpy statue version of him carved by someone who had clearly never met an actual man. His face was part lion, part angry turnip. His muscles were too symmetrical to trust. And someone had hung a wilted flower garland over his spear like an apology or a dare. A priest stood behind you, humming something ominous and waving a dish of burning herbs. The smoke curled into your nose and made your eyes water. He was muttering Latin phrases that sounded suspiciously like recipe instructions. You caught the words for blood, victory, and boiled lentils. You tried not to read into it. Apparently, surviving your first real fight meant you were worthy of a blessing. Or a curse. No one clarified. Rufus just shoved you toward the temple and muttered, "Mars likes underdogs." You weren't sure if that was encouraging or just something he said to avoid feelings. The priest dabbed something oily on your forehead and declared you touched by war. You hoped he meant figuratively, though it didn't help that a pigeon immediately pooped on the temple steps behind you. You weren't an expert in omens, but that one felt mixed. You left the temple half-dazed, smelling like sage and burnt beans. The eel man tried to high-five you, missed entirely, and then offered you half a fig. You accepted it with a nod that said, "Thanks for this sacred fruit of partial friendship." Back at the Ludus, something had shifted. People looked at you differently. You weren't new meat anymore. You were slightly overcooked meat, which in Gladiator terms was progress. A few of the others clapped you on the shoulder. A woman you barely knew handed you a chunk of bread without explanation. Even Brachus gave you a slow nod before returning to headbutting a practice dummy like it owed him money. You finally made it to the baths. Not the public ones with gossip and awkward scrubbing. These were the small, cracked tubs in the Ludus courtyard, mostly lukewarm and filled with mystery bubbles. But they were yours, and you earned them. You sank into the water with a groan that sounded vaguely divine. Muscles screamed, bones sighed, and for a moment, just a moment, you forgot how many toenails you might have lost. And then came Rufus. He appeared like a thundercloud, tossing a crust of bread into the water beside you like bait. "Eat," he said. "You'll need strength." The gods noticed you. He said it like it was a warning, then walked off, muttering something about goats and luck. That night you dreamed of gods. Not golden and noble, but sweaty and strange. Mars wore sandals and kept losing his helmet. Venus tried to sell you perfume made from lion sweat. Jupiter just looked tired and drank from a chipped amphora labelled regret. You woke up tangled in your blanket with the eel man snoring the anthem of a forgotten province. You stared at the ceiling and thought, why you? Why had the crowd cheered? Why had you survived? It wasn't skill. Not really. You'd flailed and fumbled and forgotten your helmet. You'd tripped on your own foot and blocked with the wrong side of your shield. And yet, something had carried you through. Something that wasn't just fear. Maybe it was spite. Maybe it was instinct. Or maybe, and this felt dangerous to admit, maybe it was want. Not for violence, but for something beyond copying scrolls and cleaning ink from your sleeves, to matter. Even for a moment, you rose from your cot and walked to the training yard. The stars still hung low over the walls, quiet and disinterested. You stood in the sand and lifted your sword, practiced a single movement, then another, over and over. No one watched. No one needed to, because this time you weren't practicing to impress Rufus, or the crowd, or Mars. You were doing it for you, and for the first time it felt like enough. Gladiator gossip and kitchen knife politics. Fame arrives the way most things do in the Ludus, loud, unexpected, and with someone spilling soup. It starts the morning after your first real arena bout. You're still sore in places you didn't know had nerves, still walking like you're made of splinters and shame. But when you hobble into the mess hall, heads turn. Not just to throw bread crust this time. They nod. They whisper. Someone even makes room on the bench. Unheard of. You're not sure what to do with this sudden surplus of dignity, so you sit stiffly and pretend the stew tastes better today. It doesn't. But someone hands you a cup of something vaguely sweet and very questionable, and for once you don't ask what it's made of. You just drink. The gossip reaches you in pieces. That your helmet stunt was a form of psychological warfare. That you'd trained with foreign assassins. That you were the bastard son of a retired centurion and a runaway senator's wife. You don't correct any of it. You just chew your stale bread slowly and hope no one asks for proof. Then someone does. A wiry man named Lalo, who smells like vinegar and ambition, slaps a hand on your shoulder and says, "You're not bad." In Ludus terms, this is a marriage proposal. "We drink tonight," he adds, and you nod before realizing it's not a question. That night, a small celebration forms in the corner of the courtyard. Someone's stolen wine, possibly from the bathhouse, possibly from a priest. Someone else produces a pipe and a tune that sounds like a goat dying. You're handed a slice of something that might be bread or might be a roof tile softened in broth. Spirits are high. So is one of the newer recruits, who misjudged the strength of the wine and is now loudly debating the ethics of bear baiting with a fence post. You're given a nickname. Everyone gets one eventually. Sometimes it's flattering, like Steelhide or Stormblade. More often it's Spit Sideways or Elbows. Yours is Helmet. Because you forgot it. But you owned it. And in Gladiator logic, surviving stupidly is still surviving. With your new social status comes new responsibilities, like not dying and not letting your bunkmates get stabbed over stew. You learn that boiled eggs are high currency, and disputes over ownership can lead to bloodshed. You break up your first fight with a ladle and a well-placed joke about goat stew. It works. Mostly because no one wants to be the guy who stabs someone with a ladle. The cook thanks you. Or at least grunts in your direction while tossing you an extra crust. It's the closest thing to affection you've received from anyone who controls the food supply. You're now what passes for a peacemaker, a dangerous job in a place where diplomacy is measured in bruises. You begin to notice who sits with whom, who whispers after lights out, who sharpens their blade a little too often. Politics here aren't written down, but they're just as real as in the Senate. There are alliances, quiet understandings, old rivalries stitched together with scar tissue and debt. You're invited into a small circle that trains together in secret, after hours, in a part of the courtyard most people avoid because of the ghost rumours. Ghosts you can handle. It's the man who trains there, an older gladiator known only as Knife, who gives you pause. He lost an eye in a fight no one will describe. He speaks rarely, but when he does, everyone listens. Knife teaches you things Rufus doesn't. How to read a stance. How to move quiet. How to win a fight before it starts. He also teaches you how to use the kitchen knives for more than cutting bread. You don't ask how he learned that. You just nod and practice. One night you catch a whispered argument between Rufus and a visiting official. Something about debt. About needing a good show. Your name is mentioned. You press yourself into the shadows and hold your breath. When they leave, you feel colder than the night air. You return to the courtyard and find your little circle waiting. No one asks where you were. No one asks what you heard. That's how trust works here. Not through questions, but through silence shared. By the end of the week, you've settled into a rhythm. Wake up. Train. Eat mystery stew. Avoid the hiccuping recruit who now sleeps with a rock he believes is lucky. Train again. Mediate an egg dispute. Sleep with one eye open and a knife under your pillow. You still ache. Still doubt. But something's changed. People look at you like you matter, like you might be the kind of story worth retelling. You're not just surviving anymore, you're adapting, becoming something sharp and strange. And when someone tries to steal your last fig, you don't flinch. You just stare until they back away. You don't smile. But you do eat the fig. Slowly. Like someone who's starting to understand the rules of this brutal, baffling little universe. That time you almost escaped, you hadn't planned to run. Not really. It started like most bad decisions do, with a half-cooked idea and a fully empty stomach. The stew that night had tasted like betrayal and shoe leather, and your roommate had just discovered a new way to snore through his nose and mouth at the same time. So when you spotted the gate, the side one, the one usually bolted shut with a chain thicker than your forearm, and saw it sitting slightly ajar, something ancient and stupid inside you whispered, "Go." You didn't think. You just moved. 4 steps. That's how far you got. 4 glorious, foolish, freedom-drenched steps. The night was warm, the stars uncaring, and the gravel beneath your sandals felt like triumph. Then came the voice. Going somewhere? It wasn't angry. That was the worst part. Rufus didn't yell. He just stood there, arms crossed, as if he'd been expecting you to try this. Like he had bets riding on it. And maybe he did. You froze, mid-step, like a statue caught in the act of being very dumb. Slowly, dramatically, you turned. Rufus tilted his head and smirked. "Fast feet," he said. And then, with a casual wave, pointed you back toward the Ludus. You shuffled past him like a dog with a stolen ham bone. No one else was around, or so you thought, until the next morning when someone had scratched Sprinter into your shield. The name stuck. Not in a noble, Mercury the Messenger sort of way, more like an ironic tattoo you couldn't remove. The consequences weren't as bad as you'd imagined. No lashes, no solitary confinement. Just extra laps. So many laps. Your legs became noodles. Angry, rebellious noodles. Rufus didn't mention it again. But every now and then during drills he'd say "faster Sprinter" with that same smirk. And every time you'd run harder, out of spite, out of pride, out of the desperate hope that someday you would make it 5 steps. The funny thing was, people started treating you differently. Not worse, not better, just differently. A few gave you respectful nods, not because you failed, but because you'd tried. In the Ludus, that meant something. Trying to escape wasn't just rebellion, it was hope in motion. And hope was rare here. Like figs in winter or stew without a chewy mystery lump. A few nights later you found a fig on your cot, just sitting there. No note, no explanation. It was fresh, unbitten. You held it in your hand and laughed quietly to yourself. Maybe it was a joke. Maybe it was encouragement. Maybe the onion guy was pranking you, but didn't matter. You took a bite. It was perfect. You began to notice things more. The sounds of the gate during lockup. The rhythms of guard shifts. The fact that Eel's snoring had predictable cycles. 3 snorts, 2 whistles, repeat. Not because you planned to run again, not right away, but because part of you had awakened. A new awareness. A sense of yourself as someone who could. Even if you didn't. Because trying, even failing, had changed something. You'd seen what lay beyond the gate. Just a moonlit alley, really. Some stray cats. A cart tipped on its side. But also possibility. A world that hadn't been measured in bruises and practice drills. The Ludus was still the same, still loud, still sweaty, still full of smells that defied science. But you were a little different. You stood straighter, sparred harder, dreamed wider, and every time Rufus said, "Fast feet," you nodded. Because maybe one day you wouldn't stop at 4 steps. Maybe one day you'd get all the way to 5. One last fight. That wasn't yours. It started the night the rain finally broke the heat. For weeks the Ludus had been thick with sweat and silence. Too hot to complain, too hot to fight, too hot even for Rufus to shout properly. Then the clouds came. A crack of thunder split the air like a blade through old leather. Everyone rushed to the courtyard to watch it fall. Rain, that is. Honest, glorious, sky-sent rain. You tilted your head back and let it soak you, eyes closed, mouth open like a thirsty plant or a dramatic poet. That was the same night they posted the roster. They always did it when it rained. Fewer questions, fewer outbursts. The list was nailed to the door of the mess hall with a bit of flair, as if it were announcing the Emperor's birthday rather than next week's possible funerals. Your name wasn't on it, but someone else's was. Gaius. Your friend. The one who once dislocated his shoulder trying to open a wine jug with a spearhead. The same guy who gave you half his bread when you were too bruised to chew. The same guy who carved a little wooden dog and hid it in your sandal after you mentioned missing yours back home. That Gaius. He was scheduled for a prime match. Not practice. Not a small skirmish. A full-blown, high-attendance, noble-spectated duel. Against someone known only as the Wolf of Trastevere. You weren't sure if that was a nickname, a title, or a legally adopted identity, but either way, it wasn't good. Nobody who called themselves the Wolf was ever the underdog. Gaius pretended it didn't bother him. Said it was an honour. Said he'd been waiting for this. Said it was better than dying of stew poisoning. But you saw the way his hand trembled when he folded his tunic. The way he stopped halfway through a joke. The way he lingered too long over his bowl of lentils that night, like he was memorising the shape of each one. You tried to talk him out of it. "Trade," you said. "Let me go instead." He shook his head and smiled. "You've got worse knees," he said, "and worse luck. You'd trip over your own entrance music." You tried to train with him, sparred gently, gave him tips, let him knock you down more than usual. You stayed up late, going over possible tactics, like either of you had any say in what happened once the sand soaked through with blood. The Wolf had 3 confirmed kills and a fan club. Gaius had a lucky rock in his belt and a poem he never finished writing. The day of the fight came fast, too fast. They always do. The gates to the arena opened with ceremony, trumpets, banners, vendors selling honeyed nuts and tiny wolf figurines. You walked with Gaius to the holding pens. He had a fresh tunic. You tied his belt for him. He tried to make a joke about you being his valet. His voice cracked halfway through. Then they called him Gaius of the Ludus Magnus. The crowd cheered like he was a parade float. You cheered too, but it caught in your throat and stayed there. You couldn't watch from the floor. You weren't on duty. So you climbed the cheap seats, sat among gamblers and garlic-breathed fruit sellers and children with sticky hands. You found a spot with a view and a loose stone you could grip until your knuckles went white. The fight began. And for a moment, just a moment, Gaius held his own. He dodged. He blocked. He landed a hit that made the crowd gasp. You stood up. You shouted. People looked at you like you were mad. Then the wolf got serious. You saw it happen in slow motion. The shift in stance. The tightening of the jaw. the blur of movement that didn't look human. You saw the blade arc down like a sunbeam made of iron, and you saw Gaius fall. You don't remember getting back to the Ludus. You don't remember the walk, or the food, or the noises people made when they pretended not to care. You sat in your cell and stared at the wall, the damp patch that looked like a fish, the crack that ran through the word hope someone had scratched there long ago. Someone passed by and muttered, "He went quick." You didn't answer, because they were wrong. Gaius didn't go quick. He went loud. He went brave. He went smiling, probably because he didn't want you to worry. That night, the stew burned. No one complained. The onion guy didn't talk. Rufus didn't yell. It was like the whole Ludus held its breath. You sat with Gaius's wooden dog in your lap, the one he carved. The ears were uneven. The tail was chipped. It was the ugliest little thing you'd ever seen. You never let it go. The next morning they posted a new list. Your name was on it. What being a gladiator taught you, you're still alive. Somehow, you've got a scar on your shin that looks like Sicily, a shoulder that clicks when you roll it, and a faint whiff of boiled onions that just never seems to go away. But you're still here, breathing, bruised, and bizarrely wiser than the day you stumbled into the Ludus with nothing but your scroll-copying hands and an unfortunate haircut. You used to think being a gladiator was about the fighting, the clashing of swords, the roar of the crowd, the glory. But that was never it. Not really. It was about getting up, when your legs shook, when your pride was dented, when your cellmate used your sandal as a pillow and refused to apologize. It was about showing up to the training yard again and again, even when your ribs ached, even when the stew betrayed you, even when you were pretty sure the medic was just using vinegar and hope. It was about noticing things, like how Brachus always rubbed his thumb before he swung, or how the old trainer's voice softened when he talked about retired fighters who bought vineyards. It was about learning to read people, not just scrolls. To know when someone needed space, or a spare fig, or just someone to sit beside them while they stared at a wall and remembered home. You learned to sleep lightly, to eat quickly, to laugh when you could, especially if the laugh surprised you. And to never, ever trust stew on a Wednesday. You learned that fear doesn't disappear. It gets quieter. It learns to sit beside you, not on top of you. You learned how many things in life can be solved with a nod, a grunt, or an awkward shoulder pat. You found strange joy in little victories, not winning matches but tying your sandals without cursing, not dodging a sword swing, but remembering someone's name the second time they told you. You learned that bruises fade, that fig thieves make good friends, that even a gladiator can be gentle, and that gentleness is not the opposite of strength. Sometimes it's the proof of it. You stopped asking why you were here, and started asking what you could learn while you were. You learned to love quiet in a world built on noise, to value shade in a courtyard of sunburns, to protect others even when you could barely protect yourself. And one day, you caught your reflection in a puddle. Just for a second, and you didn't see a victim, or a joke, or a copyist who got very lost. You saw someone who had endured, who had adapted, who had somehow miraculously made something out of sand and sweat and soup made of regret. You wouldn't call yourself a gladiator. That word still felt too sharp, but you were something. And whatever that something was, it mattered. You mattered. And now, as the fire crackles beside your cot, as the others snore and shift in their sleep, you let your body relax. You let the past settle. You let tomorrow be tomorrow, because tonight you're simply here, and somehow That's enough. Street food of ancient Rome. What did they really eat? It's the year 68 CE. Rome is loud, hot, and full of flavour, sometimes in ways you wish it wasn't. You've wandered into the Forum Holitorium, where vegetables meet shouting and everything smells like roasted garlic, wet linen, and ambition. You are just looking for water. Instead, you've entered the beating heart of Rome's street food scene, and it's glorious. A toothless vendor throws a handful of lentils into a pot the size of a bathtub. Someone near you yells, "Who took my turnip?" A goat walks past wearing a bell and no leash. You're not entirely sure the goat isn't in charge here. This is how most Romans eat. Not in grand villas with reclining couches and wine bearers, but standing, hunched, over a cracked bowl of barley stew near a public fountain. It's quick, it's hot, and it doesn't require bribing your way into the Senate. A thermopolium, one of hundreds in Rome, is just ahead. It's a stone kiosk, curved and cracked, with round terracotta jars sunk into its counter. Steam billows from one like it's offering sacrifices to the gods of chickpeas. You lean closer. One pot holds a spiced lentil mash, the other what looks like fish stew, or maybe fish ambition. A young cook waves you over with a ladle. "Hot today," he says, sweat pouring from his forehead. You nod. He adds, "Best day for boiled cow feet." You nod again, less convincingly. A girl no older than 10 rushes past you, balancing a wooden tray with 6 clay bowls stacked high. She vanishes into the crowd. Someone shouts her name or maybe curses it. Behind you, a man in a dirty toga slaps a tray of grilled Domus onto a stand. They're tiny, golden brown, stuffed with pine nuts and honey, arranged in perfect lines. He sees you looking. "Protein," he says proudly. You pretend to sneeze and walk away. To your left, a boy is hawking garum, the pride and stench of Roman cuisine. A fermented fish sauce, somehow saltier than the sea and smellier than defeat. He's giving out samples on crusty bread slivers. You try one. It tastes like a sunburned anchovy punching you in the nose, and somehow you want another. Next stall over, an older woman sells libum, sweet cheese bread wrapped in fig leaves. She hums while pouring honey over them. A wasp circles. She swats it with the grace of a queen and never breaks rhythm. You ask how much. She shrugs. Depends how polite you are. You bow so deeply your knee cracks. She laughs and hands you 2. A dog walks by with a sausage in its mouth. No one stops it. No one dares. In a shaded corner, 3 men argue over olive prices while sharing a fried pastry stuffed with lentils. They shout with their mouths full. It sounds like law. It smells like cumin. A gladiator in training walks past. You can tell because he still has all his teeth and looks confused by spoons. He's holding a steaming bowl of tripe stew and muttering something about sand in his boots. Back in the main walkway, a teenage boy with a crooked smile holds a tray of deep-fried chickpeas tossed with salt and pepper. "Snack of champions," he calls out. Unless you're allergic to beans, then snack of disappointment. You buy 2. Not far from the Temple of Saturn, a small girl is selling figs soaked in wine. She holds one out to you like an offering. It drips into your palm. "Too ripe," she says, "but good for dreams." You eat it anyway. It's messy. It's perfect. Past the fruit carts, a woman squats beside a low grill frying sausages spiced with fennel and chopped leeks. She has a scar on her cheek and a laugh like thunder. Her hands are burnt. Her food is divine. You order what she calls the brave person's mix. It includes things you cannot identify. They taste like bravery and regret. A man nearby juggles apples for tips. He's terrible at it. But no one seems to care. It's the gesture that counts. You find a quiet ledge under an old statue, probably someone famous who hated snacks. You unwrap your meal, a barley cake, 2 cheese-stuffed dates, and a still steaming egg sprinkled with herbs. A jug of watered wine sits beside you, free to anyone near the public fountain. You dip your bread in the lentil paste. It tastes earthy, simple, homey. As you eat, a pair of soldiers sit nearby, loudly comparing fig merchants and their alleged corruption. One says, "Lucia's figs are bigger." The other replies, "Lucia's figs gave me hives." They agree to switch to plums. You notice a blind musician across the road. He plays a 3-string lyre and sings about a baker who burned his eyebrows trying to impress a widow. You leave a coin. The widow's part was especially moving. A child bumps into you holding a honey cake almost the size of her face. You help her balance it. She grins, then sneezes directly onto your hand. You nod. She nods. You never speak of it again. You walk toward a vendor with fried fish wrapped in fig leaves. He smiles, half his teeth gone, and offers you a sample. "It's not the best," he admits, "but it's what I've got." You eat it anyway. It's actually incredible. He shrugs. The gods like modesty. There are no menus here, no recipes written down. Everything is touch, taste, tradition, and a little bit of panic. Each vendor cooks what they know, what their mothers knew, what some sailor once traded them for a story. At a stall shaded by worn linen, a man with a donkey sells wine-soaked bread cubes rolled in herbs and sesame. He feeds one to his donkey, then himself. You try not to ask which came first. A soft breeze lifts the smell of everything. Honey, vinegar, cumin, sweat, into one glorious cloud of edible confusion. You close your eyes. You've eaten more than you meant to. You're sticky, full, and mildly dizzy, but somehow content. A bell rings in the distance. A group of students scatter from the fountain. A magistrate passes, scowling at the olives stuck to his sandal. Rome breathes around you, uneven and spicy. You rest under the archway of a bakery, eyes heavy. Inside, someone's still singing. Outside, someone's still selling. And here you are, between fig and fire, between noise and nap. Tomorrow you'll try the goat cheese wrapped in grape leaves, or the pork belly pie with a crust so flaky it's rumoured to be cursed. But tonight you sleep with honey on your lips and history in your belly. Dinner at a Domus, inside a Roman family's kitchen. It's the year 68 CE. You've been invited, by accident or fate, into the home of a moderately wealthy Roman family for dinner. Not a feast, not a banquet, just dinner. The kind where someone burns the bread, someone else won't eat their lentils, and everyone talks over each other like it's a competitive sport. You're in a domus, a single-family home for those lucky enough to afford walls. The front of the house opened straight onto the street. No fence, no front lawn, no privacy. But once you pass the entrance, past the barking dog chained near the door, past the mosaic warning "Cave Canem" that never seems to work, you find yourself in an atrium, open-roofed, echoing, and inexplicably damp no matter the season. This is not the kitchen. The kitchen is hidden, on purpose, because even Romans who cooked their food over fire preferred not to smell like it all day. The Collina, their version of a kitchen, was a small smoky room tucked away in the rear of the home. No windows, just one open hearth. And you, sweating. You're not the cook, but you've made the mistake of standing near the cook. "Can you hold this?" she asks. She doesn't wait for an answer. A ceramic pot lands in your arms. It smells like garlic, goat, and guilt. Somewhere inside is what she insists is a stew for the gods. Judging by the sizzle and the orange foam along the rim, it's also a stew for the brave. The kitchen is chaos. A boy with soot on his face stirs lentils. An older woman, possibly the grandmother, possibly immortal, pokes a tray of dormice roasting in honey and poppy seeds. A chicken squawks somewhere behind you. It's unclear if it's a live dinner or both. Don't touch that. Too late. You've knocked over a stack of chickpea cakes which hit the floor with a soft, pitiful thud. Everyone turns. No one helps. You mumble an apology. Someone hisses. They're better once they fall, gets the dust flavour in. Dinner prep is not glamorous. The hearth is black with old fire. The ceiling stained with old ambitions. There is no counter space. Everything rests on stools, laps, or optimistic balancing. One girl grinds herbs using a mortar and pestle that looks older than the Republic. Another fans the flames using a piece of broken roof tile. This is not a modern kitchen with copper pans and minimalist shelving. This is survival. This is rosemary in your hair and ash on your tunic. And it smells, strangely, delicious. Eventually the food migrates from Colina to Triclinium, the dining room. You're ushered in through a curtained archway. The room is small, candlelit, and furnished with 3 low couches arranged around a table that's too short to be helpful and too wide to reach across. Reclining while eating is mandatory for the adults, frowned upon for children, and outright hilarious when someone tries it for the first time and spills their wine. You lie awkwardly on your side. A slave girl hands you a piece of bread. It's dense, warm, and riddled with fennel. You chew slowly, mostly to buy time, mostly because you're terrified of what comes next. The first course arrives. It's eggs, hard-boiled, sliced, dusted with salt and crushed coriander. Simple, safe, a trap. Because the second course is pickled fish heads, and the third is a casserole made with fermented fish sauce, honey, and boiled turnips. This is garum, your host explains proudly, lifting a small dish of what looks like rust-coloured sludge. It brings out the umami. You nod. You don't know what umami is, but you also don't know how to decline politely without starting a war. So you try it. It's intense, like if salt and anchovies had a loud child. You smile bravely. He slaps your back. You nearly choke on a fig. As the courses continue, so does the conversation. Topics include whether Nero is insane or just misunderstood, whether the new neighbour is a spy, whether boiled carrots help with memory. They don't, but everyone claims to remember that they do. A boy slips you a handful of olives. A girl offers you a honey cake with the solemnity of a treaty. The food keeps coming. So does the wine, watered down, but still powerful enough to make your ears warm and your Latin fuzzy. By dessert, you've reclined fully into your cushion, bloated with gratitude and barley. The final course, fruit and nuts. No wild flaming pastries, no panna cotta, just figs, walnuts, and dates stuffed with peppered cheese. The grandmother snores softly. Someone plays a flute. The slave girl brings in warm water to wash your hands, because even in a city that smells like drains, the end of dinner is sacred, and then you're done. Not full, not empty, just right. The host raises his cup. To family, to peace, to second servings. You raise yours too, and whisper to yourself, to surviving garum. Public baths and private gossip. An afternoon at the Thermae. It's the year 68 CE, and it's bath day, which is to say, it's every day. Because in Rome, bathing isn't just hygiene, it's ritual, it's relaxation. It's where deals are made, rivals eavesdropped on, and backs scrubbed with alarming enthusiasm. You don't go to the baths to get clean. You go to become Roman. The sun is just beginning to slide west when you approach the Thermae. Not a small neighbourhood bathhouse. No. Today you're going to the big one, the Baths of Agrippa. Marble arches gleam in the afternoon light. Children chase each other around pillars. A street vendor sells honeyed almonds outside the entrance, and someone nearby is tuning a lyre very badly. You pay the entry fee, 1 quadrans, the cost of a small loaf of bread, and walk through the high bronze doors into another world. The first thing that hits you is the heat. The second, the noise. The baths are alive. Voices echo off stone. Slippers slap tile. Laughter bounces from wall to wall like a discus no one asked for. You are by default underdressed. No one minds. A man in a senator's ring adjusts his towel while arguing about olives. A group of teenage boys cannonball into a cold plunge they're definitely too old for. Nearby, an older man scrubs his back with a strigil and a kind of intensity normally reserved for battles. You begin in the appetiterium, the changing room. There are no lockers, just rows of niches and a slave assigned to watch your belongings, which is comforting until you realise that he's also selling fermented bean cakes on the side. You disrobe. He nods solemnly and takes your sandals. You hope you'll see them again. First stop, tepidarium, the warm room. You step inside and immediately feel like a dumpling. The air is thick and sweet, scented with rose oil and ambition. Columns surround a heated pool, its surface shivering with light. Gentle music plays somewhere, or maybe that's just the ringing in your ears. You ease into the water, muscles you forgot you had unclench. Someone offers you a piece of fig cake from a silver tray balanced on the edge of the pool. You take it. It's warm, sticky, and makes you trust humanity again. Next is the caldarium, the hot room, and by hot we mean lava adjacent. Steam curls along the floor like a living thing. The marble benches are too warm to sit on right away, so you hover like a cautious bird before settling in. A bucket of water is ladled onto a pile of heated stones. The room hisses, so do you. Around you, men debate philosophy in togas that have been reduced to sweat rags. A woman nearby discusses garlic prices like it's statecraft. In the corner, a poet recites verses between gulps of cucumber water, clearly hoping to be discovered. A man named Marcus plops beside you, completely uninvited. "Did you hear about Gaius?" he whispers. "You have not. You don't even know Gaius." He's been seen, at night, sneaking into the bakery on Via Tulia, claimed it was for bread, at night. You nod solemnly. This seems deeply suspicious. Marcus leans in closer. Also, he might be Greek. He nods meaningfully. You nod back. You have no idea what that means. Time for a scrub. You lie face down on a heated slab while an attendant named Lucilla applies oil with brisk efficiency. She doesn't speak, but she does hum what might be a gladiator march while scraping your back with a curved metal strigil. It's oddly soothing. Also, your spine is now very shiny. Lucilla smacks your shoulder, nods, and disappears into the steam like a helpful ghost. After that, frigidarium, the cold plunge. This is not optional, this is tradition, this is terrifying. You stand at the edge. The water is a pale, perfect blue. It looks serene, inviting, like death, but polite. You jump. Your soul briefly leaves your body and files a complaint, but when you resurface, gasping, alive, you feel divine. Now, relaxed beyond logic, you wrap yourself in a fresh linen and wander the halls. There's a library tucked near the atrium, full of scrolls on politics, astronomy, and at least one anonymous guide to flirting in Greek. There's a gymnasium too, though no one seems to use it for lifting anything but pride. You pass by a small garden where people nap under fig trees. A flute plays softly. Somewhere, a dog barks. Somewhere else, a toga falls off with comic timing. You linger for a while, a cup of honeyed wine, a game of dice with a boy who cheats adorably, a brief but intense conversation with a philosopher who only wants to talk about turnips. It's perfect. And then, as the sun slides low and your fingertips are pruned beyond recovery, you head toward the exit. Your sandals are returned. Your robe smells faintly of time, your body cleansed, your mind lighter. Your secrets, now someone else's. You step into the fading light of Rome, a little warmer, a little calmer, and very, very Roman.